Queer by Sherwood Anderson. In Winesburg, there is a store called Cowley and Sons, and they sold everything such as honey, suspender buttons, roof paint, a cure for rheumatism, and a substitute for coffee.
But they sold nothing.
The family who owned Cowley and Sons are Ebenezer Cowley, who has a long neck, gray beard, and always wore a Prince Albert coat, and his son, Elmer Cowley, who was tall and had long, powerful arms.
I'ma take your grandpa style.
The story starts with Elmer Cowley looking through the window across the street into the Winesburg Eagle, where he sees George Willard. Creeping away from the window, Elmer sees his father talking to a Jewish traveling salesman who was trying to sell him metal substitutes for collar buttons.
You're a jerk! You're a jerk!
Elmer stops what he is doing and goes over to the glass showcase by the door and grabs a revolver and waves it in the air, yelling,
"We ain't gonna keep on being queer and have folks staring and listening. You get out of here!"
The salesman stumbles out the door and yells,
"You're crazy!"
Elmer runs off and leaves Ebenezer dumbfounded.
"I'll be washed and ironed and starched."
Thinking to himself as he walks down the dirt road, he thinks about George and how he passes the store, thinking that George laughs about him with the townspeople.
Everybody talks, everybody talks, everybody talks.
George Willard, Elmer felt, belonged to the town, typified the town, represented in his person the spirit of the town.
It started with a whisper.
As he walks towards a barn that the Cowleys used to own, and he remembers a time when he never encountered anyone when he worked all day and he slept all night.
He runs into Mook, a former employee of the Cowleys when they owned the farm, who was childlike and dim-witted. Elmer starts to rant at Mook about everything.
My mother is so queer. Even her dress is queer. And Dad's queer because he wears this old, dirty coat and he doesn't even want to buy a new one. And Mabel, my sister, is the only normal one, and she knows it, but won't say anything about it.
He also complains about how his dad buys everything and anything that are broken and unbuyable.
But his dad is totally unworried and calm about their finances because he doesn't know what he's doing.
Ever since he moved here a year ago, everywhere he goes, he feels as if everyone is talking and laughing at him. He feels so queer. He couldn't tell anyone in town, but he was so frustrated that he had to find another queer, Mook, to vent to.
He looks at Mook and gets an idea to talk to George and tell him he is not queer.
So Mook gets up and says to himself,
I've been washed and ironed and starched.
and he proceeds over the cow and says,
Emma is crazy. You better hide.
He heads over to the Winesburg Eagle, where George Willard is working, and demands to him,
"You just come out now. I want to see you."
Hey, you there? Hey, you there?
This is the scene where George and Elmer are walking down Main Street, and Main Street is a representation of the iceberg effect, where Elmer only gives his 10%.
while George is thinking, I've always wanted to meet him. I wonder what he wants to say.
And I was like, why are you so obsessed with me?
But Elmer gets frustrated and is unable to show his 90% and yells at George to go back. Then Elmer wanders Winesburg, dwelling upon his defeat.
In the arms of the angel.
He then gets a great idea.
Yeah!
Elmer proceeds to the family store and takes $20 from his father's stash.
Money, 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 money.
His idea is to hop a train to Cleveland, build a new life, and no longer be queer.
Before he leaves, he thinks to himself that he must tell George that he is not queer.
So he goes over to the new Willard house and yells at the clerk to wake George up and meet him at the station.
Pronto.
George meets Elmer at the train station and asks what he wants to say.
Yet again, he is tongue-tied and fails to give his 90%. Instead, all he says is,
"I'll be washed and ironed and starched."
Elmer hands the $20 to George, tells him he stole it, and proceeds to attack him until George is on the floor, then runs away.
Run away fast as you can.
Elmer looks back at George with pride and says to himself, I guess I showed him I ain't so queer.
The end!